Peace and blessings be upon you all. Welcome to the second day of Islam Appreciation Week at Loyola University Chicago. My name is Nash.
I'm Keisha.
And we're going to be co-emceeing tonight for you. So Islam Appreciation Week is a week at Loyola, an annual week at Loyola, where the MSA holds various types of events to dispel common misconceptions about Islam and spread appreciation, general appreciation of the religion and the people. And right now we're going to have a short recitation of the Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنما المؤمنون إخوة فأصلحوا بين أخويكم واتقوا الله لعلكم ترحمون. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent and most Merciful. The believers are but brothers, so make settlement between your brothers, and fear Allah, God, that you may receive mercy. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم ولا نساء من نساء عسى أن يكن خيرا منهن ولا تلمزوا أنفسكم ولا تنابزوا بالألقاب بئس الاسم الفسوق بعد الإيمان ومن لم يتب فأولئك هم الظالمون. O you who have believed, let not a people ridicule another people. Perhaps they may be better than them, nor let women ridicule other women. Perhaps they may be better than them. And do not insult one another, and do not call each other by offensive nicknames. Wretched is the name of disobedience after one's faith, and whoever does not repent, then it is those who are the wrongdoers. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم. O you who have believed, avoid much negative assumption. Indeed, some assumption is sin. And do not spy or backbite each other. Would one of you like to eat the flesh of his brother when dead? You would detest it. And fear Allah. Indeed, Allah, God, is accepting of repentance and merciful. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female, and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah, God is the most righteous of you. Indeed, Allah is knowing and acquainted. Sadaqallahu al-Azim.
Hi everybody, so BCC and MSC decided to collaborate together to talk about what is the Black Lives Matter movement and why it's become increasingly prevalent, and how have similar efforts played a role in shaping Islam's history. So one of our speakers is Paige May. Paige May is an abolitionist and Chicago-based youth organizer with the South Daughters. She is one of the 8 delegates from We Charge Genocide who traveled to the United Nations in 2014 and was the lead author of the Shadow Report documenting police violence in Chicago that was submitted to the UN Committee Against Torture. In addition to organizing, she is a middle school teacher at Village Leadership Academy. In all of her work, she is committed to a transformative justice framework that centers young Black people.
Hi, what should I be down here? Alright, hey everyone. While I figure this out. Can you all hear me okay? Is this on? Yes? No? Yes, now? Maybe? Okay. Can you hear me for now if I project? Alright, we're gonna do that. So, hi, my name is Paige, and I think the battery's dead, and I normally don't like to begin talks by like making a disclaimer or like saying, because I don't like to come across as apologetic. But I want to say 2 things. One, I'm so grateful to be here to talk about this. I think it's an extremely important conversation to be having, but I don't feel like I have any expertise, or like I'm not coming at this because I feel like I know the answer. But people seem to like the way that I speak, so here I am. The other thing that I want to say is I have never been called the N-word or the B-word or told I should die as much as I have in the past 48 hours, and so I'm really frazzled, and if it comes across, and if it comes across particularly angry or emotional, it's because I am, and I'm not apologizing for it, but it's there, and I might not be the most cohesive, but I'll do my best. So, I was asked to kind of just have some opening comments about my general thoughts on the connection between Islamophobia and anti-Blackness. And I want to start by talking about what I understand anti-Blackness to mean, because in my experiences that tends to be sort of the main challenge to this work, is that people have a very different understanding of what it means. So I want to share where I'm coming from. So in order, most people, right, sort of use anti-Blackness and racism interchangeably, and I want to distill what anti-Blackness means. And I think there are increasingly, in spaces like organizing spaces I'm a part of, an understanding that there are differences in how different groups and different identities and different communities experience their oppression. And I think anti-Blackness is distinct. I'm not saying it's special, that it's worse, that it's beginning, I'm just saying it's distinct. And for example, right, we can see the ways that like indigenous people experience a very particular kind of oppression, and it's very different, both historically, but also as it is right now, compared to what Black people have experienced. And in order to understand that, we have to understand the history of slavery. And we have to go back to before the transatlantic slave trade. Because because slavery of Black bodies occurred before then, right? And so, slavery has existed for I don't know how long, for a very long time. And there have been sort of 3 eras of the enslavement of Black people. And, is it coming? I hear something. So before you have white identity, so before white supremacy, you have anti-Blackness. And this comes about because there's this global consensus that is occurring, where while you have many different people are enslaved, you see at this particular time, particularly during the Arabic trade slave, where increasingly it's coming to be understood as acceptable, as normal, as natural for slaves to be from Africa. And as this is happening, right, because of these 3 eras of slave trades that are taking place, you're seeing more and more Black people being enslaved and the populations of non-Black, non-African people going down. And so you see, before you even have concepts of whiteness, you have Black equals slave. And that's the beginning of it all. And that's historical. Like this isn't like a theoretical thing. Like if you just look at the history of slave trades, you see a global consensus of to be black means that it's okay for you to be a slave. It makes more sense for those people to be slaves taking place. So then the question is though, what does that have to do with now? And this is where a lot of my disagreements with the more Marxist and like class-based labor folks begins. And so a lot of times people understand slavery to be about the exploitation of labor. And that's not systematically true. And this is how I'm coming into anti-blackness. So I understand slavery is actually not about the exploitation of labor, but the production of something called social debt. And so anyone who's ever been a slave, regardless of their race, has experienced social debt. And to be socially dead means you experience three things. One is general dishonor, right? So this means that regardless of what you've done, because you are black, it's bad, right? Nobody wants to be black. It's never like the great thing. You might want to buy black, you might want to appropriate it, you might want to have symbols of it that you tokenize and consume, but you don't want to be black. The other thing is natal alienation. So this means that you as a black person have no control over your ancestry or your descendants. So we don't get to know where we come from. We don't get to do the family tree in the same ways that my other classmates did when I went to an all-white elementary school, right? That was just like a part of growing up black. The prison system, right, targets and disrupts families. The foster care system targets and disrupts families. Slavery, right, you were taken from your land, you lost your mother, and then your children were taken from you. So you see the ways that especially families are targeted through these systems of oppression. And the third is something called naked violence. This is, I don't know how else to put it, but 16 shots, right? The brutalness of slavery. And this, again, anyone who was a slave experienced those things, all three of those things. And together, they produce a condition that is coming to be known as something called social debt. So why is this anti-black? If any race can experience that as long as they're a slave, how is this anti-black? So you have this moment of global consensus, black people slave. And this is not dependent on any kind of violation. It's not, we are going to enslave you because we want your land. It's not you're being enslaved because you lost a war. It's not you're being enslaved because you crossed a border or the border crossed you. It's just because black people are slave. Period. So you see the modern day equivalent of this of after Sandra Bland dies in police custody, the viral hashtag, if I die in police custody, it's because I'm black. That's all. That's all they need. That's the only reason they need, right? They'll give you a million reasons, but at the end of the day, Mike Brown was killed because Darren Wilson said he looked like a demon. You're not even a human, you're a demon, right? And that is the only violation we need, that you're black. And no other race can claim that. Many other races have been enslaved, but none solely just because you are black, just because. To make that possible requires something called gratuitous violence, which is just a fancy way of saying repeated acts of violence. So not only is Laquan shot 16 times, his video goes viral. And I guarantee you, that video has been seen by millions of people, and not millions of people protested. Not millions of people did anything about it. It was just consumed. It was a viral consumption of black death. And this is important because what it does is it affirms non-black people's sense of humanity, sense of presence, sense of being, because you know watching that would never happen to you. It wouldn't. It just wouldn't happen to you. The things that happen, and then, again, I'm not saying that it's worse, I'm saying that it's distinct. When people most likely to be killed by the police are not black, they're Native American. But their deaths are invisible acts because they experience a different kind of oppression. Theirs is a project of genocide. And for genocide to work, we can't think that they still exist, that there are still indigenous people living. Because to acknowledge that would be counterproductive to the logic of genocide. So their deaths by the police will never go viral in the same way that a black person's death will. Because that's a different logic of anti-blackness. Hopefully I'm making sense. So what is this? Why is this important? So I identify as an abolitionist, and many people think that this means, increasingly people who are familiar with that language think, I'm trying to abolish the police and prisons, which is true. But I'm actually thinking something more radical, right? I'll read a quote, okay. So this is by an author named Saidiya Hartman. She wrote a really great book called Lose Your Mother. And she said, the demands of the slave on the present have everything to do with making good the promise of abolition. and this entails much more than the end of property and slaves. It requires the reconstruction of society, which is the only way to honor our debt to the dead. This is the intimacy of our age with theirs, an unfinished struggle. To what end does one conjure the ghost of slavery, if not to incite the hopes of transforming the present? Given this, I refuse to believe that the slave's most capacious political claims or wildest imaginings are for back wages or debt relief. There are too many lives at peril to recycle the forms of appeal that at best have delivered the limited emancipation against which we now struggle. So I lift up this quote because I think it does a beautiful job of articulating how our current moment as the inherited unfinished struggle of the slave, that the only way we can honor our debt to Rakia, to Mike Brown, to Eric Garner, to Oscar Grant, to MLK, to Asada, to all of the slaves whose names we'll never know, because all they are is marked as pounds of flesh dropped into the ocean to save weight. Right? The only way we can honor that debt and fulfill that legacy of an unfinished struggle is a radical transformation of society that abolishes the condition of social death. That is what Blackness needs to do. We need to abolish social death. It's not complete liberation, but only through Black struggle can we do that work, because only Black people experience it. So I think what this means for this conversation is that this to me is a conversation around what is solidarity and what are the connections, right? Because of course there are people who are live at the intersections of Islamophobia and anti-Blackness, and we need to center those folks because those are the folks that understand best, right? And if we center them and they get free, all of us get free, right? Or at least more than just non-Muslim Black people get free. So those folks need to be centered, but at the same time, this is a conversation about solidarity. Because my understanding is that, especially at Loyola, this chapter doesn't have a lot of Black Muslim students. So what does that mean? And for me, solidarity doesn't mean we have to be the same. It doesn't mean you have to understand what I'm going through, that you have to relate, that you have to have a common enemy. To me, solidarity means that you're willing to take on risks because you understand that what I'm experiencing is wrong and it shouldn't be happening, period. It means that you show up for me even when you have nothing to gain. It means that you risk yourself even when you benefit more. That's actual solidarity. So I'm not asking for non-Black people to understand what I'm going through. I'm not asking you to understand my rage, my anger, my joy, my hopes, my dreams. I don't care if you don't understand. I care if you're going to support me. I care if you're going to show up. I care if you're going to respect that Black people know best how to get themselves free. And it's mutual, because we need each other. And I don't know how else to put it. It's actually, to me, it's not that complicated. What it comes down to is no magic formula, but real relationships, authentic relationships with people, not organizations, not coalitions, but people. And that happens to be facilitated through organizations and facilitated through coalition, but we have to know each other. We have to know what we've been through, we have to know what triggers each us, what we're working on, and we have to know what ideas we have, how to work well together. And so I want to, I guess, end more with some examples of things that are already happening that I think speak to the solidarity work that has to be done. And I have two things. The first is, I forgot to mention something. Okay, so with solidarity, yes, we should make connections. There are common enemies, and those should become targets in campaigns that we work on together in solidarity. Also, we need to do a lot of self-reflection, right? Like, I'm saying this as a Black person who knows that I engage in projects of genocide. I engage in projects of Islamophobia. There's all kinds of, I'm privileged in many ways, right? And at the same time that I experience anti-Blackness and sexism and all these other things. So it requires a mutual commitment to self-reflection in the ways that we are complicit in each other's oppression. And being honest and real about that. Like, not saying like I've been perfect and that I'm in solidarity means I'll never hurt you again. Like, I will. And I want to have a real relationship that you feel comfortable telling me that I messed up and that I hurt you and how I can make that better. So anyways, the examples I want to give are, one is a group called Organized Communities Against Deportations. And they're a grassroots group here in Chicago that does a lot of incredible work to resisting deportations of people, right? And so they responded to a call put out by BYP 100, Black Youth Project 100, to help shut down the International Chief of Police Conference that took place in Chicago last year. And this is a conference that happens all around the world, and it happens every single year, and invites chiefs of police from countries all around the world. So we had, it was over 100 countries represented, thousands of cops flying in. And to make a very long story short, we had by the end of it, it was like over 200 people involved in a direct action that had 5 different components, and one of which was led by OCAD. And OCAD was essential to almost every different sections, every different cell's strategic thinking and development of tactics, because they know what they're doing. They've been doing this work. And so they helped plan it, they helped strategize, they helped build everything, they helped lead it, and they helped us shut down that chief of police in a way that allowed Black people to still be centered, to still be the faces in the photos, to still be the folks who talked about it. It was beautiful. And in that process, we developed really strong relationships. So then, a few months later, when one of my now friends from OCAD reached out saying, hey, there were a bunch of raids that happened recently in the community, we're going to do an action, would you all be interested? And I said, yes, tell me what to do. And they said, climb on that ladder and go to jail. And I said, sure. Like that's what we need to do for each other. So they went to jail for us, I go to jail for them, and we made connections along the way. The other example is recently there was a big push to get Anita Alvarez out of office, the state's attorney. It was called Buy Anita. And that was organized by a collective of Black organizations. Sada's Daughters was included in that. And we were pushing out, we did 17 actions in 1 month. And we won, which was really cool. But it was exhausting. And it was getting to the point where it was just like, we are making the state's attorney in Cook County very, very angry. She has to lose. Like, what are we going to do if she wins? So we're starting to get panicky. And so our allies just start really showing up. Like, these are folks who are absolutely affected by the state's attorney, right? If you're a radical, if you're a protester, you're affected by what the person who's in charge of deciding what to charge you with does, and who's in that position. But Black people are most impacted by the state's attorney, and they understood that. And so they just started doing work. They started taking over trains and passing out voter guides and getting people to commit to voting her out of office. And I want to particularly lift up Asian Americans against Anita Alvarez, who just ran with it. They organized a train takeover because I asked them to. Then they just did a whole press conference because they knew it was important, and they said, as Asian Americans, we are against Anita Alvarez because of what she does to Black people. And they just translated it into, I think, 5 different languages. It was beautiful. And then they also helped drop banners. We did 16 banner drops from 16 shops. And we had folks from that group that responded to a call at midnight, showed up at 12:45 and went and dropped several banners, risking having to go to jail for doing that at 2 a.m. And then they dropped a few more the next day. And so I'm getting that more, like, I think that there are actually ways that these things intersect, and I'm happy in the Q&A to talk more about those things, but they also don't have to intersect, and I think that has to be okay. That we're trying to build a world, for me, that part of what combines those oppressions are that difference should never, that currently we live in a world where difference is justification for your domination and for the loss of your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I want a world where that's not true. And so I think we need, as a result, then we need to build a movement where difference doesn't take away from our ability to work together. So I'll stop there and pass it over.
So just as a side note, we have a box at the table outside for Paige's organization, Asada's Daughter, if you would like to make a contribution. And our next speaker is Ubaydullah Evans. Ubaydullah Evans is the executive director of the American Learning Institute for Muslims. He converted to Islam while in high school. Upon conversion, he began studying. Okay, without further ado.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In God's name, the merciful, the beneficent. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. And may peace and prayers be upon his messenger Muhammad. I first want to say that this is my distinct honor, and this is a privilege to address this assembly. First and foremost, and this might sound somewhat humorous to you, but because we're not speaking in February. I professionally go around the country addressing Muslim communities. And every year, around the time of Black History Month, there is this uptick in interest around issues that affect the black community. There is an upswing in talk about collaborative effort between Muslim and black communities. And as soon as we exit the month of February, all of that just subsides. And these turn out to be little more than just symbolic gestures. And for me to be called upon to participate in those events is very offensive to me. So the fact that we are having this conversation at a time and in a place that hopefully is indicative of our sincerity says a lot about your recognition of the urgency of this issue. Secondly, I want to acknowledge my dear brother, Omar Muzaffar, who is a chaplain here. And I want to tell you, for the Muslim students here, you have the treat of having one of the absolute best chaplains in all of America. Because not only is he widely read, but he has really the sine qua non, right? That essential thing without which something cannot exist of Muslim religious leadership, and that is sensitivity. Someone that respects and esteems tradition, but is willing to challenge it when the situation dictates. This is what you have in this man, and I pray that Allah gives him success and makes him successful here. Thirdly, I would like to acknowledge Paige. This is an honor for me, and I hope that I can acquit myself so that I'm able to sit next to her, not merely a sympathizer, but rather an ally and a comrade. Because for me as an African American Muslim, as a black American Muslim, I have never felt more whole. I have never felt more integrated in terms of my unique identities being seamlessly merged in all of my life. But we know, and for the Muslims in the audience, if you are unsettled, if you are unnerved, that's my intention. We know that in our community, it sometimes is difficult to find that voice articulated. I'll start with a personal anecdote. I was praying Friday prayer, which is the congregational prayer for Muslims, at a mosque outside of Chicago. And it was a prosaic sermon, just something about prayer or something like that, which I really enjoyed. But afterward, an older gentleman in the community stepped to the front of the congregation, and somebody handed him a paper upon which was written different mosque announcements. And you could tell that he hadn't rehearsed these. You could tell he didn't even know what these were. This was just his job, to go up in the front, read the announcements after the congregational prayer. So he steps up, he says something about a bake sale, he says something about a couple of fundraising drives, and then you could look at him and you could see the incredulity on his face when he said, "We're chartering buses from this mosque to go down to the Daily Center for a Black Lives Matter rally?" And then he said, and I quote, "I don't know why this is important to us. We're white." The first thing my daughter, who's 9 years of age, was with me, she looked at me and said, "Hey, Dad, he's not white." And I said, "Baby, I don't think he's talking about his phenotype. I don't think he's talking about his face. Rather, he's talking about his temperament. He's talking about how he identifies. He's talking about his class privilege. He's talking about his politics. He's talking about where he lives, where he entertains, where he works, what he's concerned about. This is what he's talking about." And there were two things in that moment that left me feeling extremely betrayed. One is to make a statement like that completely belies the history of Islam in America. Because Islam in America did not start in the 1960s. Although many of you are beneficiaries of the work of civil rights activists, of which this is the most recent and unapologetic incarnation of that strain of activism, that strain of resistance. But that strain of resistance has existed since black people existed in this country. Even some of us looking at black people converting to Christianity, this wasn't even just a capitulation in the face of their masters. Professor Eddie Glaude said, no, even those people dared to redeem the religion being profaned in their midst. So black people have always had agency in this country, and they have always resisted their genocide. However, in the 1900s, the early 1900s, you had some proto-Islamic organizers, people like Timothy Drew. He's also known as the Noble Drew Ali. People like Elijah Muhammad. These were people for whom the value of Islam was not in its theological correctness, if you will, but rather its ability to give humanity to black people and to liberate them. And this is why Islam enjoys the currency that it enjoys in African American communities. This is why many of you, because of work that civil rights activists putting it on the line in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, your parents were able to migrate to this country. So to stand up in front of me and claim that he is completely divested of any effort to positively impact my people is utter treachery, it's betrayal, and it's indecency. These are the people that paved the way for you to be here. And you say that just like that. The second thing that really stings about that is that as an African American Muslim, I have attempted to lend my voice to every progressive cause facing people in majority Muslim countries. We talk about Chechnya. We talk about Palestine. We talk about Kashmir. We talk about Syria. We talk about Darfur. We talk about Egypt. We talk about Algeria. But when something impacts my community, it cannot be granted that Islamicity, that legitimacy, that it's religiously licit for us to talk about it. And I would like to proclaim right here before you that everything about it is Islamically legitimate. Everything about it is reflective of the best and fullest expressions of what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was all about. This is what he was all about liberating people and empowering them. And that is our goal in all societies, and we wish this for all people. But his sunnah, his way, his tradition is to start with the most vulnerable, to start with the most oft exploited, to start with those disproportionately affected by the ills of American racism and anti-black genocide. This is how it happens. And if you're not prepared to do that, as someone who claims to live his legacy, is someone claiming to be an inheritor of his legacy, then I question, what really are you doing? What really are you doing? Islam enjoys a special relationship to African American communities. And I learned that, ironically, here at Loyola. About 3 years ago, we were doing a program about converts to Islam. And I spoke, no, in fact, there was a white woman from Indiana. Does anyone remember her? Well, you guys have been here that long, you know what I'm saying? Giving away my age, you know what I mean? There was a white woman from Indiana. She spoke before me. And she talked about being ostracized in her community. She talked about people trying to deprogram her because they felt that she had joined a cult. She talked about her family disowning her, all because she wanted to be Muslim. And when my turn to address the floor came, I said, I don't even think I'm qualified to speak now. Because when I converted to Islam, my uncles and other community members and friends and family, they were giving me high fives. That's what's up. And they did not see me as a cultural apostate because Islam enjoys this relationship with African American communities. But we have not invested that relationship with anything besides exploitative business practices and a purposeful, willful invisibility to the things affecting those people. And you really saw this irony in sharpest relief right after 9/11. Here you had Muslim communities. They came to America, very upwardly mobile community, working, earning money, usually moving out to the vanilla suburbs. Now my man Omar's up, he lives in Jackson Park, right? Usually moving out to the suburbs. But many of them still had businesses, and mostly slum businesses. Businesses that operate at really the least common denominator, places that are poorly lit, places that don't serve wholesome food, places where people are barely spoken to as though they're human beings. And it was in these communities that they felt safest. And it was in the communities that they fought to gain entry to that they were being held under siege. And I said, look at this. The people you exploit, selling them pork and alcohol and malnutritious food, these are the people that, now that your humanity is being questioned, are still willing to see you as a human being, but you don't see them as human beings. This is a problem. And I don't know how much longer I can take the duplicity of listening to all of these sermons about racial equity and racial justice and brotherhood and sisterhood while this travesty is taking place in our midst. We as a community need to do better. We have to do better. And the way we do that is like Sister Paige said, broad-based coalitions, not the savior complex. One that denies our agency from coming into my community, telling me what I need to do. But one that allows me to be centered in a struggle for my own justice. I remember, and this is a true story, I'm not knocking anybody, but there is an attempt in this country to otherize Islam, to make Islam effectively other. And they know that if African Americans are given the platform within the Muslim community, it becomes a little more difficult to alienate that community. Because African Americans, if nothing else, and this is what you are realizing, the African American community has always had its finger on the pulse of social justice in this country. This is really the African American gift to the world, is the civil rights discourse. So when you see those people, you thank them for keeping this tradition alive. But I was slated to appear on Windy City Live to talk about Islam in America. And as soon as the person called me to give me a few pointers about going on, and I think she could hear something in my voice. And she said, are you the right person? And I said, I'm Ubaydullah. I think I'm the right person. But I don't know. You know what? I'll call you back. So she hangs the phone up abruptly. Very rude woman. She calls back. You know what? We've decided to go in a different direction. I said, was there something that I said? Or no, we're going in a different direction, we're sorry. When I turned on the telecast, it was Bishop T.D. Jakes Jewish woman that was a rabbi in Ahmed Rehab from Canada, who was a good friend of mine. I'm not knocking Ahmed Rehab. But it made it very clear that they want to continue, this non-black monopolization around the discourse on Islam in America. And we as a community have been complicit players in that. And this cannot continue. This cannot continue. I'll say this and I'll close. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the early part of his prophetic career, was ostracized, he was held under siege, he was ridiculed. But the one thing that gave him any anchorage, any mooring, to make his moral stance in his society was that he was a member of an Arabian tribe that was empowered in that community, that was recognized as being an indigenous part of that community. And what I would like to submit to you is that if the African American community at large and generally is not analogous to that tribe that insulated the Prophet, peace be upon him, from some of the attack he was subjected to, then who is? This is a community waiting for us to invest in the relationship. This is a community, as you heard, that is willing to build broad-based alliances with us. And furthermore, this is a community that many of us viscerally feel attached to and that we love because we are members of that community. And we are also members of your community. So all of the pieces are there. The only thing it requires is some courage. The courage to be introspective. The courage to challenge your own racism. That's what it requires. Because in the same way that Gil Scott-Heron famously said, the revolution will not be televised. One of the real paradoxes we have now with social media is that the revolution is effectively televised. Many of us think we can hashtag or we can retweet something, Black Lives Matter, maybe bump a little Kendrick. As we're riding home, we feel like, yeah, I'm into it. But if one of us comes home and speaks to our parents of a potentially black suitor for our hand in marriage, where Black lives don't matter that much. Black lives matter, but not that much. We have to express the willingness to be courageous, to be unfearful, to confront and address this ill as it exists in our midst. Then, and only then, can we be an ally to the folks doing this work. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to open it up to Q&A. If people want to just come up or
Grab the mic and over to you.
So a question, thank you for both of you for your presentations. A question for both of you, looking at an audience of students and a few of us who are a little bit older. Give us some advice. What should we do from the moment we leave this room?
I think, so if we couldn't get a question, it's what should you do after leaving this room? Read. I know you're in college, a lot of y'all, maybe that sounds like, I don't know, when I was in college I was like, I don't want to read more, but you gotta read. I learned a lot more actually after I paid $160,000 to Mount Lou. Reading, I started with there's this blog called Prison Culture. I didn't pay attention to $2,000. That's flirtation. There's a blog called Prison Culture that's run actually by a woman that lives here in Chicago named Miriam Kaba. And it's a really, really fantastic resource, especially if it has like essentialized readings, and it has a great backlog of things. I think a lot of these issues, it's foolish and, I don't know, the opposite of humble. Just, if these are new ideas to you, they shouldn't feel comfortable. They shouldn't feel digestible. You should have to sit with it. And so I suggest reading things and starting things like book clubs and study groups to go through some of the denser stuff. So I read through Jim Crow. That was really important. It's not the most radical thing. I have a lot of critiques of it, but it was a really important first step for me as someone who back 6 years ago, if you said, you know, mass incarceration is this conspiracy, I would have thought you were insane, or like that we should abolish the police, I would have punched you. Like I was just like, what is wrong with you? That makes no sense. But I read that book and that helped dive me into that process, and I read it with friends. And then from that book club and from that study in a like learning community, I started to get organized, and that's the second thing. We gotta join an organization because that's how you get held accountable, and that's how we actually build power. Is we build out networks that are attached and connected to each other through organizations that represent mass spaces of folks and membership. So there's lots of different groups. You have groups like Lifted Voices, you have Organized Communities Against Deportations is open to a lot of folks, Loyola student groups, like all of that is fantastic. But get organized in ways where it's not just about political education of other people. We get free by shutting things down. Like, yeah, MLK was like a brilliant orator and gave incredible speeches that we should read and think about. Read Letter from a Birmingham Jail, it's fantastic. But he went to jail 30 times for civil disobedience. Amongst white people, he had a 24% approval rating. Only 45% of Black Americans thought that MLK was a decent human. Everyone else thought he was a terrorist who should be in jail, right? Like, these ideas are not going to be popular. You're going to have to engage in civil disobedience. You're going to have to have targets and demands of those targets that actually build power and shift and redistribute power. And the way that we get those things is we protest and we disrupt and we disobey. And people are not going to like you for that, which is why I'm getting in so much trouble right now. So read and be disruptive in an organized way. And listen to young Black people.
You know, when I think about what keeps communities apart and separated and perhaps unable to form the kinds of alliances, the kinds of coalitions that we need to form to take on both Islamophobia and anti-Black racism, I think it's a lot of our, and especially now Black people, a lot of our, and I'm speaking really to Muslims, a lot of our sensitivities and the fact that we can go into some of those gatherings and become thoroughly unsettled. And you have to be willing to deal with that. You have to be willing to confront that. You have to be willing to allow that opinion to speak and not made uncomfortable by it. And the only way that you can gain the ability to do that is by practicing. And there's a story that comes to mind from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that once a group of newly converted Ethiopians, these were people, Ethiopians, that had converted to Islam in the early period. And this was on a day of celebration. This was a day what we call Eid. And it's a celebratory day. Everybody's celebrating, partying, having a good time. But because they were culturally unique, they celebrated in a culturally unique way. And they started doing, in the mosque of the Prophet, choreographed military exercises, kind of like drilling. But there was definitely a rhythmic component to it, almost like they were dancing. And some of the other Arab members of the Prophet's companions, they were noticeably uncomfortable with this kind of movement. Man, I don't know. And one of them, who we esteem as an exemplar of piety, Omar, after whom Omar was up his name, he even started to throw rocks at them saying, knock that off, what is that? We don't do that. And the prophet, peace be upon him, called out to him, Allah, leave them alone. Let them do what it is they want to do. And don't be uncomfortable with that. And then in one recension of this incident, he said, carry on. Let people see that this religion has liberty. Now, you contrast that with now. Many black performers, speakers, they say, you get invited to Muslim events. But the fine print says, don't be too black. Monitor how you move. Monitor your intonation. Monitor what you talk about. You see? And we, perhaps pitifully, will alter our presentation just not to upset the sensibilities of others. This is something that we have to work on, and we can only work on it in good old-fashioned coexistence, without judgmentality. Without judgmentality. And this is something we can do simply by eating together, worshiping together, engaging recreation together, with no specific agenda. So I think we should try to do that.
Okay, I have a question for both of you. In your opinion, what is the biggest stride towards equality or solidarity in your lifetime?
What do you mean by, like, what is it that we can hope to achieve, or that has been achieved?
That has been achieved. Like, what events or person or in your lifetime?
I think, let me say, full disclosure, I have always been apathetic to electoral politics. Always. For me, it wasn't until someone spoke to me about the utter ingratitude because of people giving their lives for the suffrage of black people, that for me to be so uncritically disengaged. Nonetheless, the election of Barack Obama, symbolically, we know that racism is still alive and it needs to be eradicated. But it did say something to me about something changing within the American electorate. And I thought that this was a real gain until I heard somebody say the election of Barack Obama means that we're in a post-racial war. Then I said, oh. And when I said, well, what do you mean by that? They said, well, when I see Barack Obama, I don't even see color, I just see a human being. I said, what the hell does that mean? How can you look at a person and not see their color? What do you mean you just see a human being? And I realized that for them, and I remember Dr. Cordell was saying, that blackness is not on a continuum with humanity. So it's something you have to look past to see a human being. And I don't know how many white people voted for Barack Obama because they were able to look past his race. He pointed out in this lecture that Gary, Indiana, which is a chocolate city, had elected a white mayor like 4 consecutive years, and nobody said they were looking past his race. Because you have to look past whiteness to see human being. You see what I'm saying? So even the election of Barack Obama, symbolically, it does mean something. I would be lying if I told you that looking at a black family, looking at a black woman as the first lady, looking at black children in the White House, for me as an American does not say, I would be lying. But to say that it's the stride, I'm not ready to call it that. But it's definitely, it's significant. It's significant.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like it's still like, there's a black woman in the White House. Like that's dope. That's really dope. At the same time, it was funny when I heard that. I was like, well, and maybe it's just because where my heart is at right now. But like, grateful is the wrong word. But I think it is actually quite. I don't know the adjective, but like important for our movement to appreciate the moment we are in which Donald Trump could be the next president. because at least we can be honest now about the country we live in. Because before, people did not believe me, and now I can point to like thousands of comments proving like, no, this is what happens when Black women speak out, right? And I want to vote for him. So that to me is like, I think we can do a lot now that people are like, oh wow, like white supremacist country, it's fascist, and people get that. I think for me the dopest thing I've ever done, and we've had a lot of incredible wins here in Chicago, a mental health care center on the south side, we won reparations for the first time in the history of the world for survivors of police violence. We got Daniel's name in newspapers around the world. Like a lot of we got Anita Alvarez out of office, like incredible stuff. Gary McCarthy's gone, like amazing. But my favorite thing so far was actually a very impromptu action where basically there was this big conference that happened last summer in Cleveland. It was the Convening for Black Lives. And it was an all-black space, and it felt kind of, I'm from rural Vermont, like I'm still like in Chicago, I'm like, oh my God, I love meeting people of color, and now I'm in the South, I'm like, oh, I love Black people. It's beautiful, I love meeting so it felt like a family reunion, and it was like all kinds of just like good vibes, good feeling. But I'm the kind of person where it's like, if I didn't learn like a concrete skill or like feel like I read a book after, I feel a little bit like, oh, was it worth it? And to be honest, I left the conference starting to feel like that, but like what did we build? Like what power was built? So we're literally throwing our bags into the bus to head back to Chicago. And this person comes up from our group saying, oh, there's a young person who's being like arrested. We're doing a cop watch right now, which basically means you go down and you just walk. Just witnessing what the police are doing. And the idea is that you're showing that they're being watched and they better not mess around, right? They better not hurt this person. And so we go down there, and when we arrive, the way Cleveland works, it has in between, it's almost like they're one-way streets because there's like a barricade thing in the middle, and that's where actually there's an entrance to a train. And so this is all happening in the middle of these streets going opposite directions. And on that train platform in the middle of these streets are maybe like 30 Black people. And inside of the entranceway is this young Black child in handcuffs sitting on a bench, like all huddled over, and 5 white cops standing around him. And you can see they're starting to get stressed out because more and more Black people are showing up. And this is Cleveland, which is not used to like Chicago or like people from all around, all these Black people ready to go. And so our demands at the time are, tell us where you're taking him, take off his handcuffs, and call his mother. And they are refusing to do all of those things. So more and more Black people are coming. And we asked the boy, my friend actually asked him, do you want us to call your mom? And he says, yes. We asked what's her number, and we call the mom. So we are on the phone with his mom. The cops start to get stressed out as more people are coming, so they move him into a cop car that's now arrived. And so this child, who I think was 11 if I remember right, is in handcuffs in a cop car. I have never heard of this happening ever in my life. Maybe it has in other places, but more people start showing up, and there's this moment where this friend, a lot of us, especially in Chicago, and there are people from all around the country, Black people from all around the country are there, but most of them are on the sidewalk, and we're all kind of like, what do we do? And a bunch of us are like touching the cop car, and you can see that we want to block it, but we aren't sure, like, is that okay? Can we just block this car? And he just says, block the car. And we're just, all right, we got this. So we use our bodies, and we surround the car, and we prevent it from going anywhere, and it starts to escalate. And more Black people are showing up. And again, all we're asking for is tell us where you're taking him and take him out of the handcuffs. They're not doing it. So we have the mom's on her way. We're also calling Black lawyers, so they start arriving. The cops start getting more and more stressed out, and they start pepper spraying us. So I actually got hit right in the eye, so I didn't see a lot of it. I just had to listen to the sounds. And I'll never forget, it was like a battle. Like, I mean, they were shoving us like not out of the way. They were literally shoving us into the cop car, shoving us further, like not trying to like remove us, just trying to hurt us as they're spraying us in our eyes. And I just heard the screams, and I hear my friend Malik, who's wearing contacts, like roaring nonstop. And then my friend Janae Taylor just went, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And then the sounds of shouting and screaming and crying and running and chanting. And a half hour passes, and because Janae, she's not able to breathe, she's having trouble breathing, we call an ambulance. And these healers are like, all these Black women and femme-identified folks are like pouring milk into my eyes and taking care of us. Well, you have all these who don't know each other. We were at a community for 2 days together, right? And we are doing one of the most incredible actions I still to this day have ever been a part of. And there's tactics, there's people leading chants, there's people running and getting supplies. Like, everyone has a role. Everyone is a part of this. And it's all for this black child whose name we don't even know. And we are like, you're not getting it. You're not getting another one of ours. And the more they like, the fiercer we're committed to that demand. You're not going to get him. An ambulance arrives for Janae. She gets taken into it. The mother arrives, and then a black lawyer arrives, and the lawyer starts negotiating. And at this point, by the time I'm able to open my eyes, there are 500 black people in the street. They've taken over the entire thing. There are every cop that Cleveland has. I don't know how many. It's not very many. Like compared to Chicago, we would have been outnumbered. But it's like so many cops, and we just shut down this whole area. They take the boy out of the cop car and put him into the ambulance. And then they start changing their story. Now they're like, oh, we just wanted to get a medical treatment. They said he'd been drinking in public. Okay, did he need to go to jail for that? Like, really? You're going to take him to jail? Like, that's justice? And once he's in the ambulance, the cameras start showing up. And I'm like, oh, good. So then they take him out of the handcuffs. People are asking questions. They release him to his mother. And the mom, we shut everything down, and we open up a small pathway for the van to drive away. And I don't know what happened to him that night, but I am sure he got 12 people pepper sprayed in the face, including a child. He had 500 black people getting beaten, having to shut down the whole intersection for an hour. I'm sure his mother delivered justice. He will never do that again. He will never do that again, right? We fixed the root cause of the problem, his idiocy. Right? And so now, that too was justice. And I don't know of anyone who's ever been in handcuffs in a cop car, like a young black child released to his mother with no charges, nothing. Right? I don't know what happened to him the next day. And that night, a black woman died of mysterious conditions in a Cleveland jail. I don't know. But that moment right there, those black people, when that car drove away, we start chanting, I believe that we will win. I believe that. That's our chant, right? It's beautiful. And we're all jumping up and down in the streets. Like, we're crying. There's milk all over me. I'm a mess. And we're pumping our fists, like black power fists. And this yellow butterfly starts to rise out of the crowd. And I see this yellow butterfly. And I'm like, oh my God, it's dying. Like, it's struggling. Like, looks like it's going to fall down and be dead. I'm like, it can't die. That's a horrible symbolism. That would be the worst. But as people start to see it, people start pointing. And the more people that see it and start pointing to it, the higher the butterfly starts to go, and the stronger. Like, I'm not like a spiritual. This was the most spiritual moment of my life. And this butterfly is getting stronger and stronger. And the theme, like one of the theme songs of the movement, because of that conference, because that song kept being played at that conference, is "We Gonna Be Alright" from To Pimp a Butterfly. And there's this butterfly rising out of the crowd of 500 black people raising black power fists who are now saying, "We gonna be alright." This yellow butterfly that flies up into a tree and then disappears never to the sky. I'm not lying at all. That ancestors are real, and they are with us, and they are watching, and we will win. And I know that because of that moment. So we didn't win anything more than that black child getting released, but that mattered to me more than any campaign that I've ever been a part of. I remember every single day.
Thank you, Sabrina. And if you want to learn more about Paige's organization, you can go to asadasdaughters.org.